Welcome everyone to our first Reasons podcast 2023, and today I am joined by Dr. Balajit Nongrum, who's also my colleague here at Reasons to Believe Asia Pacific, and today we are going to talk on a very important topic called informed ethical voting. Now, before we dive into things, let me just introduce my colleague here. Dr. Balajit Nongrum was invited back at 2019 at the invitation of the Election Commission of India ahead of the 2019 general elections in India, where Dr. Balajit spoke on ethical voting, which was a part of the specially curated Shillong Talks. Now, today, as we discuss on this important issue, we would like to encourage each and every one of you to kindly like and subscribe to our channel, and also we will make sure that we will bring up contents like these in the future days to come. So getting on to things, welcome Dr. Balajit Nongrum.
Thank you, Zwala.
Yeah, and now we are just a few days ahead of the elections in Meghalaya, and also different states will be having their elections this year. So I think it is vitally important for us as citizens of India to know what it means to vote and what is ethical voting and so on. So let me just ask you this first question. Why should we as citizens vote?
Thank you, Zwala. It's such a great joy for me to be a part of this first podcast, the first episode. And it's a delight for me to have this discussion with you on the topic of informed ethical voting. So coming back to your question, why should we vote? I can't help but I'm reminded of this article that I had read, written by John Corny Murray in the 60s, and it was later on revisited by my former colleague Os Guinness on the topic of this very issue of voting. And in this very article, it actually spoke about the topic of democracy, and it takes us back to the time of the Greeks. And so their idea of democracy was very, very interesting. And in this very write-up, it actually draws out three important ideas. And it says that, back in the day, during the democracy of the Greeks, their idea was the picture of three kinds of people in a democracy. So they had the tribes people, and then they had the second category, and that is an idiot. And then thirdly, it is the citizen. What do they mean by that? Tribes people, what they had in mind is of a group of people who would be preoccupied with their own with their own interests, okay, about their own people, and they would not be concerned so much about about anything else beyond that. So it is just about us, our people, and they would huddle together, look into the very interest of that, and that is why they call it the tribes people. So they would be interested about their own welfare, and so they would do anything to fight and to protect the interests of the tribes people. The second type and the second category of people that they had in mind was that of an idiot. Now here, the very idea of idiot is not actually someone who's mentally weak or mentally derailed, but it is actually of someone who, who does not want to think anything beyond himself. All that matters for this person is just his own selfish interests. So that is the very idea that they have in mind of someone whom they have called it as an idiot. And then the third person or idea that they brought forward is that of a citizen. And a citizen is one who actually looks beyond the interests of an individual, right? So they would look at the interests of the commonwealth of the people at large. And so here in this very article, and I really like what Os Guinness actually, emphasizes, and he says that when we are talking about election, when we are talking about why voting, and so it is very clear that even during that time for the Greeks, these three categories that was available before them, the tribes people, the idiot, and thirdly the citizen, the correct and the appropriate choice for us is to vote as a citizen, not as a tribes people, not as an idiot who would be concerned only about himself, but also as a citizen who would look at the common good of the society and the culture at large. And so I think it is in that context that as responsible citizens, Zwala, I think we have a responsibility to vote as a citizen, not as a tribes people, not as as an idiot. So I think that is something that is very important for us to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I think in India, India is a democratic nation, and democracy has given us a powerful tool, the powerful right to vote, to uphold, to shape, to influence our culture through our votes. And the common slogan in India is of the people, for the people, and by the people. Exactly. And I think as citizens, that is why we have to vote. And I think that is an important thing. So coming to the next question. Now, you're an expert in this, I believe, because the Election Commission of India clearly invited you to speak on this. So what do you mean by ethical voting or informed ethical voting? Could you just share some light on that?
Yeah. I think first of all, we need to keep in mind that when we speak about informed ethical voting, now there are a few important words that we need to actually dissect there. Now, the first thing is, what is ethics? Or how should we look at ethics as a framework of how to navigate through our life? And I think the first and the foremost important point that we need to keep in mind is the practical aspect of ethics. See, what do we mean? See, when we talk about he or she being an ethical person, what do we mean? We mean someone that talks about the character of an individual, right? As someone said once that, what is your character, or what is this person's character? The true character of an individual or a person of integrity is one who lives his life or her life when nobody watches you. Yeah. And I'm sure that in the course of our life or in our existence, none of us have come to a point in our life where we have not looked over our shoulder and said, wow, I think I'm not proud of what I've done this or done that. And so, but that is at the pragmatic level. So at the end of the day, when we look at ethics, it has to do with a moral framework of moral values. And that is what philosophically also we kind of look deeper into this important aspect of moral values. Or I would say that, in a practical way, we would look at ethics as doing the right thing over the wrong things. And so when we are talking about ethical voting, it is basically, bringing that aspect of our individuality in voting, that we are not being, carried away by things that are, whether it is a bribe, or where I'm saying that, okay, I'll vote for this or that party or that individual only if I am given some benefits, right? So that would be a wrong thing. So from an ethical perspective, I would say that it is listening to that inner voice. It is listening to our informed mind rather than voting with our emotions or our hearts. I can't help but think of the co-panelists when you mentioned about the invitation that I received to speak at that event. I was there with the renowned or a tall figure of the late R.G. Lingdo, who used to be the Home Minister. And I remember him emphasizing time and again during that same event, where I was also the co-panelist. he would time and time again remind us, the audience at that point of time, saying that we need to vote with our mind rather than with our hearts or with our emotions. Because I think the challenge before us, Suala, is that will we vote with merely our emotions, or will we vote with our informed thought pattern? Because again, going back to the previous discussion, will we vote like tribes people, thinking only about us, our people alone? Or will we vote like an idiot who actually thinks only about his own selfish needs? Or will we vote as a citizen? Because let us not forget that even the constitution of our country in India actually emphasizes on this: we the people, not just your people or my people or their people, or our group of people. So I think we need to keep that in mind. So informed ethical voting would mean voting with our conscience, voting with our mind, and not merely our emotions.
Okay. So coming to this ethical side of things, what would be the basis of our ethics? I think this is something that we need to clarify when it comes to ethical voting. So what would you think is the basis of our ethics when it comes to ethical voting?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think it would depend upon so many other factors. One, it would depend upon our upbringing. It would depend upon, our family values, where we've grown up, what values have been, infused into our life. And then it would also depend upon our education, right? And then last but not the least, I think it would also depend upon our religious conviction. Now, for instance, I'm a follower of Christ. I believe in the scriptures, the Bible. And so that would be the basis for me to actually, help inform my conscience, my convictions, my values that I bring to the table even while I vote. Because I need to think not only for myself, but I need to think for the general good or the common good of the welfare of the society at large, of all people.
And I think that is an important thing, because when we think about voting, there's a quote by one of my favorite theologians. His name is R.C. Sproul. He says, when we vote, we must not just think of our wallets, but rather the common good of all the people. Exactly. And I think that is where our ethics comes into play. So, and I think that is a beautiful thing. And as we are discussing, we have a cup of tea over here with us, and I think we may have a few sips. And we like having conversations with, over a cup of coffee and a cup of tea or whatever. So if people, are willing to, and you want to have some conversations with us, our office here is here in Maudiangding. You can always come in, have a few conversations with us over a cup of coffee and so on. We would love to have some conversations with you. Now, this brings us to our next question. You just mentioned about how our worldview, how our faith might influence our responsibility toward the society. So now you've mentioned that you are a follower of Christ. So am I. I'm also a follower of Christ. So my question is, as a follower of Christ, how does our faith inform our responsibility toward the society?
Wow, I'm glad that you asked. This is a very important question. And especially, I think, why do I say before I respond to your question is, you see, there is always a gap between what we believe and how we live it out, right? And I think this is true for any follower of Christ, or even for that matter, any follower of any religion, right? And so coming back to your question, as far as the biblical mandate is concerned, see, biblically speaking, the Bible does not actually advocate a total withdrawal of no involvement whatsoever. No, the Bible does not actually come with that. Neither does it actually say that, there is a complete, or I would say a participation, 100% participation or an encouragement. It does not say any of this. But nevertheless, while it does not, advocate, or it does not actually say total withdrawal. Neither does it actually say that it is 100% involvement. But we need to come up with a third approach that I believe from the study of the scripture, that it actually has a lot of examples in the Bible that tells us about the different characters in the Bible that we have and that we see that they have been involved and they've been a great blessings, in the government of the day. So I would actually say that we need to actually look at the scriptures and the example that it offers to actually see as to how does it actually suggest or advocate every follower of Christ. So I would say the question for us is, how should one who is biblically driven, how should he act, how should he behave, especially in the context of elections? So that would be my first part of the question. Maybe you can also weigh in on that.
When I think very thoroughly about this issue, there are many beliefs within the churches, within Christendom in itself, of how people as followers of Christ would react to voting or being involved in politics and so on and so forth. And just go through just a few brief important history of the relationship between the state and the church. I think that would be important for some of our viewers. In the Bible, in the Gospel of John chapter 17, when Jesus prays for the unity of his people, he says, "Lord, they are not of this world." And when Jesus prayed that prayer, many people have thought that because we are not of this world, but rather in it, we must stay away from all of these things. And there has been a growing understanding by a lot of people that they think that because politics is too dirty, or politics may be something that is unholy, where Christians should abstain from all of this. But that leads me to the next question. If I, as a follower of Christ, should I stay away from it, or should I, as a citizen, the Greek citizen or whatever, how can I do my part in trying to actually bring about the better good of the common people? So I think this is a question that we must ask, and there has been a lot of discussions within the history of the church as well. Just a brief example. For example, one of the big church theologians, his name is Anabaptist, he says, no, we must stay away from this. But then John Calvin comes in and says, no, we must not stay away from it, because the state is actually created by God. And then the magistrates, people who are supposed to govern the state, are actually people who we vote, and then who are to bring about the divine justice in the state. So that is what John Calvin says. And the history of church tells us that there have been a number of conferences held to establish this relationship. A common example is in 1976, there was a conference by the WCC, the World Christian Council, and the Ecumenical Institute of Boise. So they listed 4 types of relationship. Number 1 is active adaptation. They would say that the church should be actively adapted to the political goals of the state, which could have some adverse effects, I agree. The second type would be a passive adaptation, where the church would totally isolate themselves from the policy of the state. The third type, which I think is favorable, is critical and constructive collaboration. That is where we as followers of Christ come in. We know that, of course, the state will do whatever it has to do. There we come in, we criticize whatever is wrong, and we also offer constructive collaboration to work with the state to, create a better society and so on. And the fourth type would be the resistance to the state, which is, again, not so favorable, but there might be a scenario where the church might take up some position, which is understandable in different places in the world. But then I think this has progressed, and in 1982, the Reformed Bible College in Michigan brought about 3 statements. They said, Christian social concern is a consequence of evangelism. Christian social concern is a bridge to evangelism. Christian social concern is a partner of evangelism. Now, why do they say that? They said there are 3 biblical ideas that are very important to bridge the state and the church, and also our responsibility in it. What are these 5 biblical ideas? Number 1 is the doctrine of creation. We know that God has created everything and He lets everything be. And He has created humans who are made in His image and likeness to let things be as well. We are stewards of His creation. The second thing is the doctrine of humanity. The doctrine of humanity, where we as representatives of the image bearers of God, we are to actually take care of God's creation. And also, we human beings were created in such a way that we are actually social animals that need social structure with a functional structure that is actually the role of politics. The third thing is the doctrine of incarnation, where Christ came into this world in the form of a human flesh. Yeah. Which means Christ was involved in all the welfare of us human beings, which means that God was not involved just from a distance, but rather He came into the world to make our society better. The fourth thing is the doctrine of the kingdom of God, where it's not just establishing a Christian nation into the world, but rather liberating the poor, helping out the needy, helping out the marginalized. That is what we are to do. And the fifth thing is the ministry of the prophets. In the Old Testament, there are countless instances where kings would actually do that which is unethical. For example, King Ahab, he used his political power to loot, the temples and so on. There comes Elijah, who was an Old Testament prophet. He risked his life and he spoke against the king. And he said, look, what you're doing is unethical. You must stop this. And I think these 5 biblical ideas would actually help us think about when it comes to our faith informing how we should vote and so on. Ultimately, if we vote using these 5 biblical ideas, I think we can have that power, influence our politics in such a way that our economy, our polity, everything, even our cultural narratives can have a better way of getting things done. So I think that is vitally important.
I think I like what you mentioned about that one word that has stuck with me is the critical and constructive involvement. I think that is one of the things that I was mentioning that should be the third important approach for every follower of Christ. The critical, constructive involvement in the coming election. And the reason why I say is, this is again in light of the counsels in the scriptures that we see through and through. Take for instance, the teaching of Christ on the Sermon on the Mount, where He calls His followers to be the salt and the light. Now I'm sure that we will need a separate episode only to pull out the important roles that we can play as salt and light in this given context. But then just to take a few important examples with regard to the upcoming election, I think I can't help but think of the role that Joseph and Daniel played back then in the governments that they were in. And their role was, it served the purpose of saving not just their own people, be it Joseph, be it Daniel. It went beyond just that tribesman mentality. It went beyond the idiot mentality. And it went on to play the role of not only the salt and the light, but, it takes the Greek thought one step ahead of being the salt and the light. So of being involved, as you've rightly mentioned, the incarnational model of not just abstaining, withdrawing, and not only 100% involvement, but constructive and critical involvement. If you go further back, I find in the Old Testament of the Bible, I find another important role that actually plays out, which is very, very important, is that of Queen Esther. I really like the 8th chapter, which it actually talks about how Queen Esther played an important role in the Persian government back then to prevent the slaughter of, of the people. And so she played an important role of bringing her influence to bear. And so I think that is something that is worth keeping in mind when we think of how our faith inform the way we act in public.
Very true. And oftentimes we try to shy away from our faith as well, but I think we need not do that. So that comes to our next question. So Dr. Balajit, how do you think we should vote?
I think that's a very good question, and very quickly, I think the first important thing is that we need, as I said, we need to vote with our conscience. See, the problem is when I speak about voting with a conscience, people would love to ask, what do we mean by conscience? I remember giving a talk on policing with a conscience. Very often you find that we are people, as far as the Bible is concerned, we are people who are created in the image of God. So we have the intellect, we have the different relational aspect, but then more importantly, we also have the God-shaped vacuum in us, the conscience, which for the sake of our intellect we send students and young people to college and universities to get themselves educated. But then what do we do with our conscience? How do we educate our inner voice? Is there any university that will do that? No. And that is why I say that is where we come back to the question of what do we mean by ethics. And in this context, I believe that it is the scripture that informs and forms the basis for my ethical formation in terms of my framework. But then it also informs my conscience. That voice that the late R.G. Lingdo would appeal to the people: vote with your mind, not with your emotion. So vote with your conscience is one that I would say, where you ethically vote. Secondly, I would say that in the context of ours, we need to actually be informed in terms of the manifestos of the political parties. The other day, I'll tell you, Zuala, a friend of mine said that, I have a problem. You have a party that they would like to vote, but there is no good candidate. And then you find if there is a good candidate, they belong to a party that they do not believe. So I believe, and this person was asking me, how should I work my way through? And I was saying that it is neither this or that, it has to be both ways. It's like in philosophy we say it's either this or that. But I think it is both hand. We need both. And so I think as people, responsible citizens of this great nation of ours, we need to know the manifestos of the parties. We need to know the character of the individual or the candidate that they are actually coming. And so in light of that, I can't help but think of, because there is this mayor in New York, his name is Ed Koch. And this gentleman would go to his constituency, and every time he would go and he would ask people this question: how am I doing? Instead of beginning with the question, how are you? He would say, how am I doing? Because he is their representative. And so basically his question of how am I doing invites them to actually scrutinize that whether he is living up or not to the standard of his manifesto and his character as well. I really hope and pray that we will come to that stage where we will be able to vote not only ethically, but we will be able to take, to hold them to account. So these are a few things that
And I think that is very important on how to ask the question, how should we vote? Because now there is a thing called political apathy. Now this has been kind of a burning question that has been, asked in the general public as well. So what happened is, in April of 2019, there's a person by the name of Dipali Yadav. She actually posted a mock question. She did kind of a pseudo experiment on what, how youths think about elections and politics and so on and so forth. So she made kind of a pseudo experiment where she put up a question on Instagram. So this question says, who should hold power to our nation? And she gave 4 categories. Number 1 was politicians, of course. The second one was businessmen. The third, academicians. And fourth, none of the above. To her surprise, none of the above got the most votes. Now, what she actually found from this pseudo research was that our current political scenario can sometimes be very toxic. The blame games, the name calling, and so on and so forth. That has actually, kind of suppressed and suffocated, the voice of change, our reason, our progress, our development, and for that matter, the opportunity for growth. For that, and because of that reason, many people have said, no, I do not care about politics anymore. Even though I may go and vote, I may listen to their manifesto, but people aren't doing anything real. So I just might as well not vote. So election day would be a self-declared holiday for them. But this is something that has become a growing concern in India because political apathy, of course, can be defined as when you really don't care about voting anymore. So this has actually become a concern in India because in the 2019 general elections, what people found out was that in urban India, the voting percentage was actually lower than the rural areas. So it was actually estimated that only about 66.4% in urban areas went out to vote. So the question is, where did the 33.6% go? Where are they? Now, I think this is a growing concern, and Dipali Yadav actually says that political apathy is the biggest social evil of our time. Why is this? Because this would lead to us having a cynical worldview, over time, where one becomes dissociated with reality and become easy prey to prying manipulators of society. I think that is something that we really need to consider about, When people are not voting, they forget about the political right they have to change our society, shape our society. And we know that India being a democratic country, the only way we can, preserve India being a democratic nation is actually when we voice out our opinions by voting for our leaders. That is, I think, very important. So I think I would love to leave people with these three thoughts. Number one, to maintain democracy, we need to drop political apathy and we must go out, think hard about voting. The second thing is, to shape our society, we must drop our political apathy and actually get back to voting again. To determine our future, we must drop our political apathy and start voting again. And I think once we get over this political apathy scenario, which is, I think, it could be predicted that this will actually become worse. We can actually revive ourselves again, refresh our minds again, and start voting and make India a stronger democratic nation again and shape our future with it.
See, just to add to that, and I think I completely agree with you. There is one philosopher who said ideas have consequences. And so if I may add to that, elections also have consequences. While it's true that elections can be very dirty at times, or politics as such, which people normally think and want to stay away because of the dirt that is there. While I agree, but I would also like to remind all of us that, there is this saying which says that, while we don't throw the baby along with the bath water, we need to retain the baby and throw the bath water. And it is in that light that I think we need to also be mindful that our vote also has an important influence and a power towards that change for the common good. And it is in that light that I believe that if you and I refrain from voting and from actually exercising our franchise, then I think we are missing the entire big picture. And that is why I think that as citizens, if we do not choose to vote, then we are giving up our voice. And as I said in the beginning, that we need to be citizens who think not only of our own interests, but of the interests of our neighbors and of the people at large. Not only of our tribes people, but again of the nation as a whole. In not voting, we are actually giving up that. We are giving up that window or that power of infusing change. And many lives are dependent upon your one single decision of voting. And when you exercise that, you are giving someone the power, as the Bible would say, that politicians or people who would govern over us, they are being given the power by us. And that is why, in closing, I would say that the Bible advocates stewardship. We need to be stewardship, not only of nature, as you've mentioned, but we also need to be steward of even this simple but profound privilege of electing our leaders. And we need to do so with our conscience, not merely with our emotions.
Amazing. And with that, viewers, we thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for joining with us. And we hope that through this podcast, you have been enlightened about what ethical voting is. And when it comes to elections, we hope that you choose that which is ethical, and we hope that God will bless you. Thank you so much for joining us. And like I said, if you like our content, kindly like and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Thank you.